On the 558th day of the war in Ukraine, the fighting was concentrated in these areas. Seeing the extremely high numbers reported by pro-Russian sources on the casualties suffered by the Ukrainian army in the Robotyne sector, and seeing how many viewers influenced by these sources speak of at least 40,000 up to 80,000 Ukrainian casualties on this sector alone, in this video I decided to do a short analysis to see if these numbers are true or not. Ukrainians are currently at the peak of their offensive on this front, after recently engaging their strategic reserves, which include the 46th Airmobile Brigade and the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. Currently, Ukraine has 12 brigades and about 5 battalions operating along the entire front line between Kopani and Novopokrovka. It is a widely known fact that most of the Ukrainian brigades did not have the maximum number of 4,000 up to 5,000 soldiers even before the start of this war. Very little is known about the initial manpower of the brigades that are currently engaged here, but considering that, for example, the 82nd Air Assault Brigade only has about 2,000 soldiers, we can safely say that the other Ukrainian brigades must have no more than 3,000 to 3,500 soldiers. Even taking into account the maximal numbers without considering previous losses, the 12 Ukrainian brigades would have an initial strength of a little more than 40,000 troops and certainly less than 50,000. If we also count the 5 battalions operating on this front, we have about 4,000 more troops with 800 soldiers per battalion. So, at the peak of their offensive, the Ukrainians have less, or at least clearly not more than 50,000 troops engaged on this part of the front line. If we calculate according to the losses declared by pro-Russian sources, then if Ukrainians have lost at least 40,000 troops, it means that they have lost over 80% of their manpower. How is it possible that an army left with just 20% of its initial strength continues to fight and advance against an opponent that with the latest reinforcements outnumbers them 2 to 1? It makes no sense to discuss the statements that the Ukrainians have lost 60,000 up to 80,000 soldiers, because these numbers are a lot higher than the total number of forces that the Ukrainians have deployed on this front. The same inflated numbers were used for the Leopard 2 tanks, where according to pro-Russian sources, most of them, at least 50 to 70%, were destroyed, while in fact, it was proved that only 5 tanks were totally destroyed, with another 15 tanks damaged but recoverable. So, only 7% of the Leopard 2 tanks were destroyed, and about 28% if we include the damaged tanks, most of which have been recovered and are currently being repaired in Germany and Poland. Of course, there are losses for the Ukrainians, and considering the limited resources of the Ukrainian army, they can be considered significant, but the numbers are by no means as high as the pro-Russian sources say. Their declarations are always proved to contain inflated numbers that are in no way based on reality. Recently, the Ukrainian soldiers have published some images that show a lot about the reasons for the slow Ukrainian advance on this front. The photos published by the Ukrainian soldiers show that in the areas around Robotyne, the Russian forces had built much more fortifications than most of the maps showed. Here, I have placed at least 4 more locations where Russian forces had built trench lines that weren't previously known to exist, but in fact, the Ukrainian forces had to clear these complex fortifications in addition to those already shown on the map of the Russian fortifications on the southern front. This, combined with the endless amount of mines, which were the main cause of the destruction of Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles during the first phase of the offensive, plus the fact that the Russian troops had a slight numerical superiority, which recently, with the new reinforcements, it is said to have gone to a 2 to 1 advantage, show the whole picture and the many reasons for the slow but continuous advancement of the Ukrainian forces, regardless of the difficult conditions and, of course, the inevitable losses. Friends, if you like my daily updates, I kindly ask you to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as this will greatly help the channel to reach a wider audience. That's all for today's update. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, and have a great day.